So my name's George Higgs, and I'm a composer and writer, and I kind of make instruments as well. A lot of my work has been kind of arranged and conceived with community groups. So that's informed a lot of the work I've done, but not all of it. I've done work quite apart from that as well. Social practice to me is when, as an artist, as a composer, a painter, any kind of artist, you're working with a group of people. It can be a small group of people, it can be a large group of people, it can be individuals from that group, one-on-one sometimes. But I think the main thing is that these people don't normally in their lives think of themselves as artists. They don't think of themselves as practicing artists anyway. Most everyone I meet in those contexts probably has some kind of aspiration artistically, even if they don't maybe identify it. That's the nice thing about the project, is that through engaging with groups that are kind of non-practicing artists, people often discover elements of their kind of character that are quite artistic. I start with ideas, with very general ideas that just occur to me. I don't know why I think of them, but an example would be working with the deaf community. Now, that was 2007 I first thought about this, and my idea was very vague and very under-researched, and had no research involved, which is the way it always begins. So I thought, what would it be like to make a deaf opera? And I went to Willie White in the Project Arts Center, and I said, I have this idea. I was really excited. I had no idea what I was doing. I want to make a deaf opera, and I'm going to build this room, or these series of rooms in the cube, and we're going to make them vibrate, and I'll have chains that vibrate, and the floor will vibrate, and the walls will vibrate. You know, I knew nothing about vibro-tactile technologies at the time, but I had it all I was excited about it. And it didn't go anywhere. And then I was keen on meeting some deaf people. And it sounds kind of sad, I want to meet people, but I wanted to meet some deaf people to see what their experience of music was. But I couldn't. I tried. I really tried. I called the Deaf Center and left messages, and there's an issue there, of course. People listening to telephones and stuff. But finally, the way I actually broke in, so to speak, was through the Contemporary Music Centre. They put me in touch with the Dublin Deaf Choir. And I think it's important to talk about that, because that's a good example of how an idea that you think of and you have all these really great ambitions for, how when you put it into practice, especially when it's social practice, when it involves other people, which it always does in some sense, because you're always going to be collaborating with someone, whether they're professionals or non-professionals. That journey from conceiving an idea to realizing it involves other people. So it's a period of transformation, and really it's where the idea gets legs, not just practically, but where it gets interesting. So I first met the Dublin Deaf Choir. I met their director, who's a hearing individual, and I asked her, how does your choir sing? I just don't get it. And she said they don't sing, they're a signing choir. So that was my first example of my ignorance. Basically, I didn't know what I was doing at that time. I didn't even know, suddenly forgot why I was there. I went in with the choir, and I had these ideas about vibrations. And there was this guy that sat in with the choir. Again, he was a hearing individual, and he was looking at me really suspiciously the whole time. And I was trying to explain through the choir director, with him watching, they were mostly older women, what I was doing. I want to put vibrations through a table, or making a chair. I was making a chair, that's right, a vibrating chair, and it had a vibrating speaker in the bum, which caused quite shocks, dismay. It really did later when I tried it out. But I was trying to explain it to him, and this guy sitting across the table said, George, they're not interested in vibrations. This is a waste of our time and your time. And I remember I was sweating, and I got really frustrated. I carried all these heavy vibro-tactile speakers to this thing on my bike, as usual. But the point is, I didn't really know what I was doing on one hand, so you could fault me, but in my defense against that cynic, that's how you start things. And if it turned out my idea wasn't that crazy, and there were other people already doing it, fortunately, as is often the case, you know, you're not a voice in the wilderness. You do have to trust yourself, trust that you're, you know, because I said it before, early on, I think I had these like, this kind of imaginary set of judges saying, George, you're being too much of an artist. George, that's your idea. It's all about you. So you know, either you listen to them and say, you're right, actually, I'm being too much of an egomaniac here. Or you say, you know, it's okay to have a bit of ego. You don't want to be an egomaniac, but you want to have strong ideas so they're excited about them. And if they have strong ideas, then you make them, they work together. But I think you have to trust yourself. I think that's a big thing for me. It's not constantly second guessing what I'm doing. It's accepting. Because if you're constantly holding back, that's not good as a person, you know, in any relationship. So trusting yourself, and then of course trusting that you're not the authority, and trusting that the person has something valid and valuable to offer. I began working in the deaf community through the Dublin Deaf Choir, and that was great, but it wasn't totally successful. I discovered that what I was interested in doing and what the choir was interested in doing were different things. But somebody in the choir said, or I can't remember who it was, somebody said, have you looked into St. Mary's School for Deaf Girls? I looked it up in the phone book. I think at the time they had phone books. We still use phone books. And I called them, and there was the secretary, and she said, oh, yeah, we have a music room, and you should come talk to Margaret Farrell. And she was a teacher there that started this music room. And they had this thing already going on a little bit, you know, with music, which was great. So that was an in, because I wasn't some person coming with some far-fetched idea. They didn't think it was far-fetched. So that was great, and I started working in the school. Basically, I had sessions with the students, with the girls, and I brought in materials, and we kind of put them together and tried different things, tried to see what worked for them. I used to use these speakers, and first I put seeds into them, then I put hearing aid batteries that they weren't using anymore, and I put these really deep pulses through and make the batteries jump and kind of make a percussive sound. And then we ultimately built this thing called the Machine of Song, which was an instrument that we all stood around and performed on. And we had a performance, and I think I discovered then, and what I already knew, that it's always good to have a performance to work towards. Otherwise, everybody, including yourself, is thinking, what is this for? Okay, it's all very well to talk about music, but unless you're sharing it with somebody. So it was nice to have that performance. So that was the beginning of the work with St. Mary's, and that I continued working there. The school was very interested, and I think the next year I worked there again, just through the school. I think they paid me, And then I got a Dublin City Arts public art program grant for a thing called this Lost and Found Sound Assembly, which was an outdoor performance with students from St. Mary's again. And then eventually I went on to do a PhD and still worked with the students from St. Mary's. And actually currently I'm doing a project with Arts Council funding for working with gestural lyrics, basically using signs as a form of language to compose music around the rhythms of these signs. So I'm working with two students who were students back in 2009 or 2010, whenever it was. Now they're 25, 26 years old. So they were 14-year-old girls then. Working, 10, 11 years on with these same girls, I guess it's just like any human relationship. You're thinking about, it's a give and take. It's an ongoing conversation. If there's something to talk about, you will meet again and do something. But it's interesting too, like with the girls I'm working with the gestural lyric, I helped one of them on their project for college, which was about deafness and music, and she made a video, could you watch it, George? It was great. It was really nice giving her feedback on her project because she wants to be a filmmaker. So that was really nice, and I guess the point is it's real. It's not, sometimes when you're doing these social practice jobs, it doesn't seem like it's real life because it's something they're doing on their off time as a hobby, like with, I don't know, some club, or it could be the school, and when they go home they're not doing it. But this was this young woman's life, and I was helping her with her life, and it was really, I think that was very interesting for me because I was just dealing with her as another adult. But the rules stayed the same, the rules being just mutual respect. And basically I'm very sensitive to whether they have enough time for what I'm doing. I'm really, I think, conscious of that. It's like I want to make sure somebody's interested rather than being forced into doing something. Because it can be like that, they can think, oh, what have I got myself into now? And I don't blame them either, A big challenge is trusting yourself, trusting your own gut to have an idea, and not to think that it has to sound like a social practice project, collaborative practice. I think that's one thing I would advise somebody interested in social practice. Don't think of it as social practice, think of it as art, and then you're working with other people. Because, if my definition of social practice applies, that you're working with people that don't think of themselves as full-time artists, but they have artistic interests, you're going to get a lot of ideas in that situation that are just as good and often better than you're going to get from artists. So basically it's a really creative environment. So just think of it as a creative environment. So that's something I'd say. Trust yourself with your ideas and don't think too much about social practice as a form of art, because I think that can be dangerous because you get, then one thing I'd say a danger is turning into an advocate rather than an artist, turning into an activist. And that's okay. Like, I'm not that person. But I've realized that while I'd advocate a lot of things for the deaf community, I can't act as their advocate. I'm doing something, I don't have the time, and that's not to be mean or anything. But you can be pushed into that role, and then you can be pushed into the role of facilitator, or even not with the deaf community, but babysitter. I've been put into that position too. So you have to have some trust in yourself and be firm about why you're there and stand up for yourself, basically. And it's not to say people are out to get you, because they're not, but things can often, people have different expectations and you need to be clear about yours. That's this memorandum of understanding, and you have to stick by your ideas as much as you have to guard their ideas too, And to be quite honest, when I started out, and maybe even fairly recently, I wouldn't have known what an MOU was, memorandum of understanding. But they're pretty important. And I think even if you don't call it an MOU, which I probably still don't, it's important for you, first of all, to come to understand what you're coming in with and be honest with yourself about it, and ideally to be honest with whoever you're working with about what you want. And it's okay to want something, but as I said before, you need to think about why the group you're going to work with might be interested. And when you introduce, I don't think you can have an MOU until you've spoken with the group, really, because then you see what they're going to be interested in, and you can see what they might want to get out of the project. So I think it's quite practical. It's what do you want from this project? What do I want? What do they want? What do we want together? And let's write it down, and hopefully you can achieve it. And that will come into evaluation later. And again, even if you don't use evaluation with a capital E, you're still thinking later, hey, were you happy with it? Was I happy with it? I mean, those are natural questions, so it's a way of formalizing that. And they're very important when you're working with participants, but you are not necessarily, not in control, but aware of who those participants are. And there have been times in projects when I sort of said to the people organizing it, I think everybody in the group should be interested in coming. And they were like, no, we want everybody in the room, I was like, but how are we going to do anything? So their thing is like, it's a group. You got to deal with the group. And my thing was like, but if they don't want to be there, I understand. So this is one of those questions of boundaries, and I actually don't know how to get out of that one, because it can be really debilitating for a project if you have 10 people and 3 people don't want to be there at all, and they could be quite strong characters fighting against everything you're doing. There's where a MOU is important, because you kind of say that at the outset. Look, if we're going to do this, you want to have people sign up, voluntarily, and not being kind of roped into it or railroaded into some project that they couldn't care less about. I had the benefit of working in a school, so you find people in schools are quite organized this way anyway, so they set out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it and all this kind of stuff. So, and actually, it's a good example of in a school situation, especially maybe in a deaf school that I worked in, St. Mary's School for Deaf Girls. Basically, they hoped I would teach classes, and I found myself, after 3 weeks, I'd become a teacher in the school, and they wanted to give me some money toward that. I remember I called somebody in Create, Catherine Atkinson, and I said, I don't know what to do. And she's like, well, you have to say, I had no memorandum of understanding. She had her memorandum of understanding, but I wasn't included. So it's a good example how it happens both ways. People can expect you to be something that you're not, or you're not. I was being funded by the Artist in the Community Award not to be a teacher, but to be an artist. So I had a responsibility, besides not necessarily feeling comfortable in that role. But that's an example. I usually think from my point of view of kind of trespassing on people's sensitivities or whatever. But that was a good example where it was in the other direction, where I had to kind of watch out for myself. One thing I've discovered over the years, there's a big difference between the group you're working with and the person leading the group you're working with. There's often another leader, and that can be beneficial, but it can also be a hindrance, So I've had a lot of issues there, and it could be in a class where you have an SNA, or it could be anybody, and it's not because of them, it's just because their role and your role might conflict. I just remember in the deaf school, for example, they didn't think I wanted to be on my own with the class, but in the end I just said, look, actually I'm much more comfortable if it's just me and the group of students. It's a girls' school, as it turned out. There was no issue with health and safety. It was just literally they thought I needed somebody present. So I just said it to them. I said, great, that means that person can go off and teach another class. Early on, when I was working with groups, I might have been working with certain group leaders who were quite very well informed about social practice and had there's a lot of lingo, there's a lot of jargon out there, which I think isn't always productive, because to be honest with you, my eyes glaze over when I start hearing about it. I'm more of a doer, and so I probably fought against some of that stuff, to be honest with you. But really, I didn't need to, because all you have to think about is you have an idea, you have something to share with other people, and you want to see if they're interested in working on that with you. That's what it comes down to. I think it's really important as an artist to be your creative self and to have ideas, have your own ideas. It's not a bad thing, because I think I've been accused of that at times. I know. It's like, well, isn't this just your project? And I'd be like, and I'd feel quite defensive. But I don't think I don't think it was necessary, because I think people like that, and that's what they want. But everybody's different. Some artists may work more from a community perspective. They might start that way, and that's fine. I think that's totally fine. Everybody's different, and that's just the way I've done it. But I guess the point is, if you have strong ideas, that's okay. Bring them there, but think about how they might be interested. Maybe not. I think it's dangerous to think about how something will benefit people, because that can be quite patronizing, but how they might be interested, how they might be not included, but take an interest, a genuine interest, to get them to spark their creativity. I do think about funding. However, there are other times when I just think about an idea and it never goes anywhere. Either I apply for funding and I don't get it, or I just think about the idea because I'm thinking about the idea and I never pursue it to its... And on my computer, on this extra drive, I have projects completed and projects uncompleted. I decided to use uncompleted because it described with more force rather than saying. But the fact is, there are probably an equal amount in both folders. But I'm just talking about an equal amount of stuff, like the amount of time I put into these projects that weren't completed. I had this one thing called the Broken Down Casino of Mixed Chance. I can't remember, I'll have to look. But I designed all these instruments for a casino, and they were musical instruments, like a roulette table that was musical, and I designed them all for this application. Didn't get it. Done. Gone. You know, it's still in my... But the point is, you have to do that. So you need to have a sensible relationship with funding, because you need money to live. But you also need a healthy amount of willingness to just put time into something with no money, because otherwise you'll never come up with a new idea. Like the Deaf project, I spent, as I said, 3 years just thinking about it, never connecting with anybody. That was 3 years of my own time. It's normal. You gotta love what you do, otherwise you're gonna be sad. You know, and ideas are only that. They're only ideas. They're not sacred, and they're always going to be there. Again, you write them down, you'll remember the idea, but it could very well transform into something else, and not to be afraid of that. But go to the group and talk to them about it, and don't be disappointed, because it happens when the response is negative. It's not always a reflection on you. It can be a reflection on where the group is or isn't. It could be a response to something going on with their leadership. Often, you know, people are in flux, and you know, you have to keep going around. But you do have to be persistent. That's one thing I would say. You have to be very persistent, and I've been very persistent over the years, and I had to be. And things don't work. Sometimes a project doesn't work. It's up to the person, it's up to you, but if you want to do this kind of work, you're going to have a few failures, you know, definitely. I mean failures, like where things didn't go right, as well as things didn't start. It just happens. You know, what can you say? You're not perfect. Don't expect. See, people can't expect you to be perfect, you know. I'd say that's a big thing. Give yourself a break a little bit, you know. Because, you know, you're more likely than not you're doing something interesting. And people should be delighted that you're approaching. That's the way I think. It's not because I'm arrogant. I'm not. I'm probably more self-effacing in those situations. But I kind of push myself. There's like another person behind me pushing me. Come on, like my dad or somebody. You know, is from the past. It's like, come on. I don't really want to go make that phone call. I don't want to make that send that email. But I force myself. You know, I think you need that push, and you need to stick to your guns. You know.